The stone walls of Canterbury Cathedral always felt cold, even in the height of summer. I was just shy of 12 summers, a choir boy named Thomas, and my days were measured by the chiming of the bells and the ceaseless prayers that echoed through the vast, echoing nave. My home was the choir dormitories, a small, drafty room shared with half a dozen other boys, each of us bound by the rigid rhythm of monastic life. Our tunics were rough wool, our meals simple broth and stale bread, but the sound of our voices, lifted in harmony, could make the very stones of the cathedral sing. And for me, a boy from a small farming village, this grand, imposing place was a world of endless wonder and shadowed secrets. My mornings began before the first hint of dawn, when the air was still heavy with sleep and the faint smell of beeswax. Brother Michael, our choir master, a man whose patience was as thin as his hair, would rouse us with a sharp rap of his staff on the floor. We'd stumble out of our straw pallets, pull on our tunics, and shuffle down to the washroom, the cold water splashing on our faces a shock to wake us fully. Then it was to the scriptorium, a place of hushed reverence where the monks copied ancient texts, their quills scratching softly on parchment. We, the choir boys, had lessons there, learning Latin prayers and the intricate notes of the chants. The smell of ink and old paper was a constant presence, a scent that now reminds me of early mornings and the quiet pursuit of knowledge. My favorite part of the day was always matins, the first service. The cathedral, still shrouded in the remnants of night, would be lit only by the flickering glow of 100 candles. Their tiny flames danced on the polished stone, casting long, wavering shadows that transformed familiar statues into looming giants. The air would be thick with the scent of frankincense and the cold, damp smell of ancient stone. As our voices rose, filling the vast space with sound, I often felt as if we were not just singing, but weaving a tapestry of sound that stretched back through centuries, connecting us to all who had worshipped here before. It was in these moments that I truly felt the cathedral's immense presence, its silent, watchful gaze. One crisp autumn morning, a change, subtle at first, began to ripple through the abbey. Father Gregory, a gentle, stoop-shouldered priest, known for his booming laugh and his kindness to us choir boys, was late for matins. This was unheard of. Father Gregory was a man of unwavering routine, his steps as predictable as the sun's rising. He was always among the first in the stalls, his deep voice leading the opening chants. Brother Michael, his brow furrowed with a mild annoyance, at first dismissed it as an oversight, a rare moment of forgetfulness from the usually meticulous priest. But as the service progressed, and Father Gregory's usual place remained empty, a quiet unease began to settle over the monks, and even some of the more observant choir boys. After the service, the whispers began. Not loud, scandalous whispers, but soft, concerned murmurs that rustled through the cloisters like dry leaves. Abbot Thomas, a stern man with eyes that missed nothing, was seen speaking in low tones with Brother Richard, the abbey's cellarer, a pragmatic man who handled all the day-to-day affairs. Their faces were grim, their gestures unusually agitated. This was not a mere tardiness. This was something else. My own curiosity was piqued. Father Gregory had a habit of leaving small, hand-carved wooden birds for us choir boys on our pillows, little tokens of kindness that always brought a smile to our tired faces. He had promised me a particularly detailed carving of a robin for my upcoming name day. His absence felt like a hollow space, a missing note in the cathedral's grand symphony. I tried to push the thought aside, focusing on my chores, polishing the brass candelabras in the Lady Chapel, their surfaces cold and slick under my cloth. But the image of his empty stall, bathed in the growing morning light, kept returning to my mind. As the day wore on, the unease deepened. Father Gregory missed prime, then terse. His cell, when checked by Brother Richard, was empty, his bed undisturbed, his few possessions neatly arranged as always. There was no sign of struggle, no note, no indication of where he might have gone. It was as if he had simply vanished. The cathedral, usually a hub of quiet activity, felt suddenly vast and oppressive. The ancient stones seemed to hold their breath, watching. I overheard fragments of conversation as I moved through the abbey. Never done such a thing in 40 years of service. Perhaps he fell ill? But where then? No. Sign on the grounds, nor by the river. The river. The Stour. A narrow, winding ribbon of water that flowed past the cathedral's outer walls. It was often a place of quiet contemplation for the monks, a place where they might walk and pray. But if Father Gregory had gone to the river, surely someone would have seen him or found some sign. By Vespers, the evening service, the whispers had coalesced into a tangible tension that hung in the air like a shroud. Abbot Thomas, his voice, clipped and strained, announced to the assembled monks and choir boys that Father Gregory was indeed missing. He ordered that all gates be secured, and that a thorough search of the cathedral and its immediate grounds be conducted at first light. His words were firm, but beneath them I detected a tremor, a hint of genuine alarm that sent a shiver down my spine. This was not merely a missing person. This was a mystery unfolding within the sacred walls of our abbey, a mystery that felt both impossible and deeply unsettling. That night, as I lay on my straw pallet, the silence of the dormitory felt heavier than usual. The familiar creaks and groans of the ancient building seemed amplified, each one a phantom footstep, a whispered breath. I thought of Father Gregory's kind eyes, his booming laugh, the tiny wooden robin he had promised me. And then I thought of his empty stall, the swirling red river from my dreams of floods in Havenwood replaced by a dark, fathomless void. The cathedral, my sanctuary, now felt like a giant, watchful beast, holding its secrets close, its vastness suddenly menacing. The cold stone seemed to hum with an unspoken question. Where had Father Gregory gone, and would he ever return? The gentle rhythms of my life in Canterbury had been shattered, replaced by an unsettling sense of dread and the chilling realization that something profoundly wrong had taken root in the heart of our hallowed home. The silence of the cathedral, once comforting, now screamed of an absence, a missing piece that left us all profoundly uneasy and afraid. The morning light, which should have been a warm and comforting presence, now felt cold and indifferent. It streamed through the arched windows of the cathedral, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, but doing little to dispel the heavy shroud of fear that had descended upon us. The usual quiet hum of the abbey was replaced by a more frantic, purposeful energy. There were no longer hushed whispers. There were terse commands and the constant, purposeful movement of men. The search for Father Gregory was underway. Abbot Thomas, his face a grim mask, had dispatched monks and lay brothers in pairs. They were combing every corner of the abbey with a thoroughness that was both meticulous and desperate. I watched from the cloisters as Brother Richard, the cellarer, led a small group, their lanterns still lit despite the sun, down the narrow steps leading to the crypts. I heard their voices echo from the depths, a series of hollow, disembodied calls. Other monks were checking the gardens, their brown habits a stark contrast against the newly turned earth. They were searching for a sign, any sign at all, a misplaced tool, a dropped rosary, a footprint in the soft soil. But as the day wore on, their faces grew longer, their movements slower, their hope visibly draining away. The futility of the search was the most unsettling part. This was not a forest, vast and wild where a man could lose his way. This was the abbey, a place of order and routine, where every stone had a purpose and every hour was accounted for. For a man to simply disappear without a trace was an impossibility that defied reason. It was as if the abbey itself had swallowed him whole. My mind, still filled with the lingering dread of the previous night, clung to the small, insignificant details. I remembered seeing Father Gregory the day before, a few hours before he was last seen. He had been walking near the chapter house, his face turned toward the sun, a rare moment of stillness in his busy day. He was not alone. He was speaking with another priest, Father Alaric, a man known for his scholarly pursuits and his quiet, almost reclusive nature. Father Alaric was a man of the books, of the high, dusty shelves of the scriptorium, a man who rarely ventured into the open air, unless absolutely necessary. I had thought it strange at the time, but in the chaos of the present, it was a tiny thread of a memory that I couldn't quite let go of. Later that afternoon, a new, more profound unease took hold of the abbey. Father Alaric was missing as well. His absence was discovered by the senior scribe, who, upon finding Father Alaric's seat empty in the scriptorium, had gone to his cell. The cell was empty, his bed untouched, and his books, neatly stacked, were the only sign that he had ever been there. It was a perfect echo of Father Gregory's disappearance, a terrifying repetition that sent a shiver of genuine fear through the very heart of the abbey. This was not an accident. This was a pattern. The atmosphere in the abbey changed from one of concern to one of abject fear. The monks, who had spent their lives believing in the sanctuary of their sacred home, now moved with a new sense of unease, their eyes constantly flicking toward the shadows. The whispers were no longer about a missing priest. They were about a curse, a dark presence, a malevolent force that was moving silently within their walls. Abbot Thomas, his usual stern composure replaced by a pale-faced bewilderment, ordered the cathedral gates to be locked and all a curfew to be strictly enforced. We, the choir boys, were confined to our dormitory after Vespers, a measure unheard of in my short time at the abbey. I sat in the dormitory, the cold, rough wool of my tunic a meager comfort against the growing chill of the night. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of the impossible. 2 priests, 2 men of God, both gone without a trace. I thought of the abbey's ancient twisting corridors, the forgotten passages and hidden rooms that I had only heard whispered about in stories. I thought of the dusty high shelves of the scriptorium where Father Alaric had spent his days, and the ancient stone of the chapter house where he and Father Gregory had spoken. Was there a connection? Was there a secret, a dark current that flowed beneath the peaceful surface of our lives? I remembered the promise of the wooden robin. A small, simple thing, but it was a promise from a good man, a man who had vanished. I felt a new kind of resolve, a quiet, boyish determination to find the truth, to find the answer to the impossible question that had taken hold of my home. The fear was still there, but now it was laced with a different, more powerful emotion: curiosity. The abbey, which had been a place of order and routine, was now a place of mystery, a great stone puzzle with a dark and terrifying secret at its heart. And I, Thomas, a simple choir boy, felt a strange, compelling pull to find the missing pieces, to find the truth of the 2 missing priests of Canterbury. I knew with a certainty that defied all logic that the abbey itself held the key, and I intended to find it. The abbey was no longer a place of sanctuary, it was a fortress besieged by fear. The second disappearance, the vanishing of the scholarly Father Alaric, had shattered the illusion of safety that the stone walls had provided for centuries. The monks, once a community of quiet devotion, now moved with a palpable unease, their eyes darting into shadows as if expecting to see a phantom. Doors that had always been left ajar were now bolted shut, and the cloisters, usually a place of quiet. Reflection felt vast and empty. The very air was thick with whispered prayers and unspoken anxieties. Our lives as choir boys, once a simple rhythm of song and chores, were now governed by new and strict rules. We were forbidden from venturing anywhere alone, and our free time was spent confined to the dormitory under the watchful eye of Brother Michael, our choir master, whose patience had completely evaporated. The silence in our room was no longer the quiet of a group of sleeping boys. It was the tense, suffocating silence of a group of frightened boys, each of us lost in our own thoughts of the missing priests and the unseen threat that now lurked within our home. But fear, for a boy on the cusp of manhood, can often be a companion to curiosity. The image of Father Gregory and Father Alaric speaking near the chapter house, a small, insignificant memory from a peaceful afternoon, had lodged itself in my mind like a burr. I knew it was more than just a coincidence. It was a thread, a single, loose end in a tangle of fear and mystery, and I felt a strange, compelling need to pull on it. The chapter house, a place where the monks held their daily meetings, was strictly off-limits to us. It was a room of solemn purpose and silent contemplation, a place of power and history. But in my mind, it had become the key to the mystery, the last place where the two priests had been seen together, the place that might hold the answer. That night, as the moon cast long, eerie shadows through the dormitory window, I made my decision. I waited until the rhythmic breathing of the other boys had settled into the deep sleep of exhaustion and fear. And then, with a heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs, I slipped from my pallet. The floorboards were cold and unforgiving. Beneath my bare feet, each creak a sound like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. I moved with a practiced quietness, a skill I had learned from years of sneaking a few extra moments of sleep in the morning. I crept down the cold stone stairs and into the long, dark corridor that led to the cloisters. The cathedral at night was a different beast entirely. It was not the place of warmth and song that I knew, but a world of oppressive silence and looming shadows. The light of the moon, filtering through the high windows, cast distorted shapes on the floor, turning familiar arches into gaping mouths and statues of saints into mournful specters. The air was thick with the scent of old stone, dust, and the lingering fear of the men who had walked these halls before me. I moved like a ghost, my small body a silent shadow in a world of silent giants. I finally reached the chapter house, its heavy wooden doors a dark, imposing presence in the gloom. I tried the handle, my small hand trembling, and to my surprise, the door was not locked. It was a small, fortunate oversight in the Abbey's newfound paranoia, and I slipped inside, my heart a wild drum in my chest. The room was cold and vast, its domed ceiling lost in the darkness above. The stone seats that lined the walls, where the monks sat in solemn conclave, looked like silent, waiting judges. I moved to the spot where I had seen the two priests speaking. I knelt on the cold stone floor, my fingers tracing the cracks in the pavement, searching for something, anything. I found nothing. I was about to give up, to retreat back into the relative safety of the dormitory, when a faint, almost invisible glimmer caught my eye. It was on the floor, near the wall, half hidden by a fallen leaf. I reached out and picked it up. It was a small, ornate bead, a bead from a rosary. It was not ordinary. It was carved from a strange, dark wood, with a faint, intricate symbol, etched into its surface, a symbol I did not recognize. Then, just as I was about to put it in my pocket, I saw another piece of evidence. Near the bead, half hidden in the darkness, was a small fragment of parchment. It was not a prayer, nor a verse from the Bible. It was a piece of a diagram, a drawing of a series of interlocking circles and lines, with a strange, unblinking eye at its center. It was a drawing that looked both ancient and utterly alien. I knew, with a certainty that defied my young age, that I had found a piece of the puzzle, a secret that was both Father Gregory's and Father Alaric's, a secret that had led them to disappear from the heart of our sacred home, I held the bead and the parchment in my hand. Two small, fragile keys to a mystery that was far more vast and terrifying than I had ever imagined. A mystery that was now a part of my own story. A mystery that was rooted in the very fabric of the Abbey itself. I crept from the chapter house, my heart a wild drum against my ribs, the small ornate bead and the fragment of parchment clutched tightly in my hand. I had heard a sound, a faint rhythmic shuffle of sandals on stone, and I knew a night patrol was near. I pressed myself against the cold, damp wall, a silent shadow in a world of silent giants. The footsteps grew louder and I held my breath, my entire body a knot of pure terror. The figure of Brother Richard, the Abbey's pragmatic cellarer, appeared at the end of the corridor, his lantern casting a long, wavering beam of light that danced on the stone floor. He paused, his gaze sweeping the hall before moving on, his footsteps fading into the darkness. I let out a long, shuddering breath, the air cold and sharp in my lungs. My escape had been narrow, a moment of pure luck that I knew could not last. Returned to the dormitory, my bare feet silent on the cold stone stairs. I slipped back into my pallet, the rough straw a familiar comfort against my cold skin. I carefully hid the bead and the parchment deep within the folds of my tunic, a secret buried close to my heart. The other boys were still asleep, their rhythmic, breathing a soft, reassuring sound in the darkness. But my mind was wide awake, racing with the impossible truth I had found. I waited for the first light of dawn, for the first tentative chirping of the morning birds before I dared to look at my treasures again. I pulled them from my tunic, the bead and the parchment. The bead was cold and smooth to the touch, carved from a dark, unfamiliar wood that was harder than oak. The symbol etched into its surface was a series of intertwined lines that seemed to have no beginning or end, a silent, beautiful enigma. The parchment fragment was brittle with age, its edges frayed. The diagram was a series of interlocking circles, and in the very center, a single, unblinking eye, drawn with a detail and a precision that was chilling to behold. The eye seemed to watch me, its gaze filled with a cold, ancient knowledge that I could not comprehend. I knew, with a certainty that went beyond words, that this was not a simple prayer or a monastic diagram. This was a secret, a map to a hidden place or a forgotten truth, a secret that had taken two men of God from our midst. My mind, a boy's mind filled with stories and legends, began to make connections. I remembered the old monks whispering in, the cloisters about the Abbey's past, about a time before the current cathedral had been built, when an older, smaller church had stood on this very ground. They spoke of forgotten tunnels, of hidden passages, of a secret society of monks who were the guardians of a sacred, ancient artifact. The artifact was a relic of great power, and its location, its very existence, was a secret known only to a few. These were stories, of course, whispered tales of a bygone era, but now, holding the bead and the parchment in my hand, they felt more real than any prayer I had ever recited. I thought of Father Alaric. He was a scholar, a man of books and knowledge. He had spent his life in the scriptorium, the high, dusty room where the oldest texts were kept. It was a place where ancient languages were translated, where history was preserved, and where secrets, I now realized, could be found. Father Alaric would have been the one to understand the diagram on the parchment. He would have known what the unblinking eye represented. He would have been the one to find the missing pieces of this ancient, terrible puzzle. And that, I realized with a fresh wave of terror, was why he was gone. He had not just stumbled upon a secret. He had found it. He had pieced it together, and it had taken him. The scriptorium, with its high shelves and its scent of old paper and ink, had always been a place of quiet reverence for me. But now, it felt like a labyrinth of secrets, a treasure. Trove of forgotten knowledge, a place where a small, fragile clue could lead to a great and terrible truth. I knew, with a certainty that defied my young age, that my next step had to be the scriptorium. I had to find the book that Father Alaric had been studying, the book that held the key to the diagram, the book that held the key to the secret that had taken 2 men from our midst. I felt a new kind of resolve, a cold, hard determination that pushed aside my fear. The abbey, which had once been my sanctuary, was now a dangerous labyrinth of secrets, and I, a small, insignificant choir boy, had become a detective, a seeker of truth. I was no longer a passive observer of this terrible drama. I was a participant. The bead and the parchment were my ticket into a world of hidden truths and ancient secrets, a world that was both terrifying and utterly compelling. I knew I was taking a risk, a terrible risk. But the memory of Father Gregory's kind eyes and the echo of Father Alaric's quiet dedication fueled my courage. The cathedral had swallowed 2 men, and I, Thomas, was going to find out why. The May game had begun, and I, a boy with a small, powerful secret, was going to play it to the end. The fear I had carried from the chapter house was now a quiet resolve. I knew where I had to go next. The scriptorium, Father Alaric's sanctuary, was the only place that could hold the key to the diagram on the parchment. It was a place of forbidden knowledge, a place where the abbey's oldest and most sacred texts were kept, and it was my only hope of finding the truth. My journey there was a silent, desperate prayer. I moved through the dark, cold corridors with a practiced stealth, my bare feet making no sound on the stone floor. The familiar creaks and groans of the ancient building were no longer just a backdrop. They were a soundtrack to my secret mission, a chorus of phantoms in the dark. I finally reached the scriptorium, a long, narrow hall with high, arched windows that were like great, blind eyes in the darkness. The air here was different, thick with the scent of old paper, dried ink, and dust that had settled for centuries. The moonlight, filtering through the high windows, illuminated the rows of ancient texts, their spines a silent, orderly army of history. Father Alaric's desk was in its usual place, a small, worn island in the vast sea of knowledge. It was a place of perfect order, his quills neatly arranged, his half-finished parchment lying on the surface, a testament to his quiet, meticulous nature. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I moved to his desk. I knew what I was looking for, a book that was not like the others, a secret book, a book that held the key to the diagram on the parchment. I ran my hands over the spines of the books on the shelf above his desk, my fingers tracing the faded titles. They were all books of prayer, of scripture, of holy texts. They were a testament to the abbey's pious nature, but they were not what I was looking for. Then, my hand, almost without thinking, brushed against the underside of the desk. My fingers, a boy's small fingers, found a small, almost invisible ledge carved into the wood. My heart leapt into my throat. It was a secret compartment, a hiding place, a place that was not meant to be found. With a trembling hand, I reached inside and pulled out a book. It was not like the others. It was small, bound in a dark, worn leather that felt old and supple. It had no title on its spine, no marking on its cover, just the smooth, dark surface of ancient leather. I brought the book to the faint light of the window and opened it. The pages were a yellowed, brittle parchment, and the ink a dark, rich. Black had been painstakingly applied by a hand long since turned to dust. This was not a book of prayer. It was a book of secrets. On the first page, I saw a drawing of the symbol from the bead, a series of intertwined lines that seemed to have no beginning or end. On the next, I saw the diagram from the parchment, the interlocking circles and the unblinking eye. But here, it was not just a fragment. It was a complete diagram, a map of a world that existed beneath our feet. The pages that followed were even more terrifying. They were maps of the cathedral, but not the maps I knew. These maps showed hidden passages, forgotten tunnels, and secret chambers that were buried beneath the very foundations of the abbey. They showed a hidden world, a subterranean labyrinth of stone and darkness that was a complete mirror of the sacred world above. I saw the symbol from the bead and the unblinking eye repeated over and over again, marking locations, marking entrances, marking a path. I knew, with a certainty that went beyond words, that the priests had not been taken. They had gone somewhere, following this secret map, following a path that was known only to a few. Suddenly, I heard a sound, a faint shuffling of feet in the corridor, the quiet but unmistakable sound of someone coming. My heart, which had been a wild drum in my chest, now froze with a cold, absolute terror. I was caught. I quickly slipped the book back into its hiding place, my hands fumbling in the darkness. I slid back under the desk, my small body a silent knot of fear. The footsteps grew louder, and the light of a lantern danced on the walls. The figure of Brother Richard, the abbey's cellarer, appeared in the doorway, his face a grim mask, his eyes searching the room. He was not looking for me. He was looking for something else, something that he had lost or something he was trying to find. He moved to Father Alaric's desk, his hands running over the books, his brow furrowed with a quiet desperation. He was a man searching for a secret, and I, a young boy with a small, powerful secret of my own, was hiding from him. The abbey, which had been a sanctuary, was now a labyrinth of secrets, and I was in its very heart, a small, insignificant observer of a game that was far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. The game had begun, and I, Thomas, a boy with a small, powerful secret, was going to play it to the end. I had not found the priests, but I had found their path, and I knew with a terrifying certainty that I was going to follow it.